get content through voice activation. And was it Andrea was saying her son was asking Siri, where's my cape? So let's talk a little bit now on how you can take your content right now and get it ready for voice delivery right now. Hannan from Zoom-In, come on up.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Yeah, I guess so. First of all, welcome everybody, both here in person and as well as on the virtual track. Happy to be here. And just a few words about myself. I'm Hannan, I lead product management with Zoom-In Software, and I'm here to talk about digital assistants and voice search today, or as Jack correctly stated, how to take your existing content and make that available for that next generation of voice consumption. Okay, so, you know, in the last few years, both voice search as well as conversational UI in general has gone a huge, way from where it was. In 2012, if you recall, Siri and OK Google and all these, digital assistants were pretty much a nice, flashy toy, and people, played around with them, and they called their names, and they insulted them, and they just wanted to make how they were going to be, fools out themselves. And sometimes, Siri would also do something practical, like you could ask her, what's the time right now in the West Coast, or what's the weather tomorrow near my house, and that was, nice, but this is no longer the case. In the last, 2 years or so, these things have been, like the technology has been progressing so quickly. And, if you look at Siri from 2012, where people, just made laugh of it and it made a fool out of itself, about 4 years later, that same Siri was able, under the same use case or under the same scenario, to save the life of a baby. When a mother, cried out to Siri for help, for an ambulance, Siri actually got that ambulance in time and saved the baby's life. And I think that's sort of really symbolic of what happened over the last few years in making that from some kind of flashy toy into a real digital assistant that can actually get job done. So when we talk about voice search or voice assistants, I'd like to talk about 3 main channels that can make that happen. So first of all, that's a digital assistant that you know from your phone, right? You got Siri with Apple, you got Alexa with Amazon, you got OK Google from Google, you got Cortana from Microsoft. These are the 4 main ones, and there are a couple of other ones. Channel number 2 is your web search engine. So if you go to Google Chrome, or if you just open Google, there's this microphone icon right next to the search bar. So that's channel number 2. And channel number 3 is, within the company, you might have technologies like a smart portal or enterprise search that might be able to do voice-activated commands. So these are the 3 things we're going to talk about today, and we're going to show you how to optimize your content for each of these things. Let's just talk a little bit about why we think voice is the next big thing now. Gartner, I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. Gartner are the most lucrative IT consulting firm in the world. And as part of their basically 2017 strategic predictions, Gartner said that they forecast that by 2021, early adopter brands that redesign their websites to support voice search are going to increase digital commerce revenue by 30%, right? So these things start with e-commerce, but very quickly they're going to get to our industry, and they're going to redefine the way our users consume content. So in the last Google I/O is the annual Google Developer Conference, Google revealed some interesting statistics about voice search and how it's progressing. So you can see that voice search basically grew up 35 times since 2008 until 2016, which is huge. Actually, Google said that today 20% of all Google searches in the world are voice activated, and they forecast that it's going to be 50% by 2020. Just imagine. In addition, if we look at surveys and we ask people, how long have you been using that technology? You can see that 42% of the users said that they started recently using voice-activated commands or asking via voice in the last 6 months. And what that tells us, it's not just a lot of people, but this is exponential growth, right? What we see here. And also the technology is really, really improving. Like if you look at, a few years ago, you would have detection rate accuracy, basically the percentage by which you speak to these devices and they can really understand what you're saying, of about 50 or 60%. Today, all major vendors are at about, more than 90% accuracy. You got the best minds in Silicon Valley investing their best engineers. We're talking Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Oracle. All these big companies are putting a lot of money into voice accuracy technologies. And today, machine learning and artificial intelligence and natural language processing has become a commodity. And I think that goes a long way into optimizing these technologies. In addition, I don't know if all of you are familiar with what a skill is, a voice skill. But when you have a digital assistant, let's take Amazon Alexa, for example, a skill is something that the assistant can do for you. So basically, the assistant can call you, can call a taxi for you. That's one skill. It can close the lights in your home. That's another skill. Or it can order a pizza, which is a third skill. So Alexa, Amazon's personal assistant, in the beginning of 2016, Alexa had 135 third-party skills, meaning it knew how to do 135 tasks using voice activation. Today, less than 2 years later, we're at 15,000. Just imagine. That's huge. And that tells a lot about how people are adopting technology and how businesses are so eager into adding themselves into these. Think about that as the app store of voice, right? Skills. So where do we want to be? What does that mean for us, right? What's the holy grail for people who write content and need to make that findable? And I think the holy grail is that. And if we take optimize and available via voice assistants. So I think, there are three main implications or influences that each of us should basically think, how that affects him in person. So the first thing is that all of us, in the last 5 or 10 years, were educated to do minimalistic Google searches. Everybody said, optimize for short keywords. This is what users look. Users are not going to give you long sentences. The user that wants a running shoes is just going to say best running shoes, and then he's going to scroll through the results in Google, and that's what you need to optimize your content for, and this is what generations and generations of writers and SEO consultants did in their content. With voice activation, pretty much like in chatbots, that completely changes. People no longer just, say, okay Siri, or okay Google, or hi Siri, best running shoes. No, they don't do that, right? They say, hi Siri, I want, or okay Google, I need a size 10.5 running shoe with this rating that's located in this place, and go figure it out, right? That's the way it works. And that's hugely different in terms of content optimization from what we're all used to do in terms of short keywords. Impact number 2, right? In the old world, in the world of web search, you go ahead, you write something in Google, you get whatever number of Google search results. Everybody knows that, what's the best, where's the best place to hide a coffin? In page 2 of Google. That's everybody know. But we all thought that as long as you're in page 1, it's okay. If you can be number 1 in page 1, that's huge. But even if you're number 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, you're still in pretty good shape. That completely changes with voice. Because as I said, when you talk to a digital assistant and the digital assistant creates or takes the highest ranking result for you and reads it aloud for you, number 2 does not exist. There is no number 2. This becomes an all or nothing game because there is no second best. If you're second best, you might as well be number 50 on the list. It doesn't really matter. And the third implication is that at the age of voice assistants, users expect an action. They don't expect a reference. When I go to traditional web search, I type in my keywords, and I'm getting a few references to different websites, and I'm exploring. I'm going to click a couple of links. I'm going to go there. I'm going to see what it gives me. With voice, people want to talk to the device, and they want the device to give them an answer back. They don't want the device to tell them, go ahead and research, right? They want the device either to give them an answer or to perform an action for them. So I think these are the 3 major implications we all need to think of. So now that we understand, what voice search is and how it works and how, what's the sort of considerations we need to take into consideration, what I want to do now is I want to share 3 major tips with you that are going to help you practically take your content tomorrow and start optimizing them for that age of voice assistants. So tip number 1, right? Think scenarios. And when I say think scenarios, I mean think about what your users would like to know, from your website or about your content. In other words, think about what's the most frequently asked questions people ask, and try to create a scenario. And a scenario is basically, for example, if I'm a car company, I would say, as a driver, I want to change my flat tire. Okay, so as a driver is an actor, and I want to change my flat tire is basically, it's a value statement, right? So go ahead and accumulate as many scenarios as you can. And then once you have these scenarios, try to translate them into questions. Basically, if the scenario was, what does my user want to know? The question is, how will my user going to ask it, right? What's the question is going to be? So for example, in that case, they might say, how do I change a tire? Or I need to replace a tire, or any other of different combinations. Now, there are different ways of, if you create the scenarios yourself, and that's fine, when you're looking into how users are going to ask it, there are different places or different processes you can employ to basically get that answer. So one is obviously, interviews or observations or whatever, but maybe the best one or the strongest one is to actually go to online tools. So for example, you got Google, Keyword Planner or PageRank Checker, also a Google product, or you have other commercials products like Storybase and dozens of others, free or commercial product, and they're going to show you what your users literally put in Google, and you can learn so much about it because that teaches you empirically how they're searching today. Once you have these, questions written down, then you can formalize them into short answers. So sometimes you would have topics already set up for them, so maybe you just need to tweak them. And sometimes you'll learn that, maybe you don't have that content, and you need to write it down, and you need to create it. Tip number 2. Okay, tip number 2 is let's get your content in shape. Once you have these topics, make sure that your content, first of all, is topic-based. Make sure they're as small as possible. Okay. Next, if you want to be there in the Google answer box, the first thing you want to do is you want to include this answer summary, right? The summary of the answer to the question in the first paragraph on your page, and even better, in the first sentence in the first paragraph on the page. That really helps you drive your SEO scores up. You shouldn't forget that, while 20% today, 50% tomorrow, it doesn't matter, use voice. There are a lot of people that will still use regular, web search. So you shouldn't, when you go into optimizing your content for long tail phrases, you shouldn't forget that some people are still going to search with short keywords. It's fine. So you got to make sure that you optimize for both, okay? In order to help you basically prepare better for long tail phrases, use subtitles. Subtitles is an excellent tool. You can create longer, more expressive subtitles, and that is really going to help you optimize for long tail. Use procedural bulleted checklist. If you have a task, don't be afraid, right? Put bullets, step 1, step 2, step 3. Search engines and digital assistants really like that because it helps them formalize an answer. Don't bother with SEO keyword meta tags. They don't work. It's a lot of work. Google doesn't use them. Bing doesn't use them. Nobody uses them. There are very specific meta tags that do work. Keyword isn't one of them. Use action triggers. Okay? Google highly favors, for example, how or what. So if you have a subtitle about changing a tire, call it how to change a tire, or what do I need to do to change a tire. And the last thing about that, schema.org, you might have heard the name. Schema.org is a markup language, which is pretty much a standard today in the e-commerce world. A lot of companies use it for the e-commerce website in order to surface up with basically semantic markup that helps Google surface them up as these, answer boxes. It's got a huge potential in our industry as well. Unfortunately, most standards aren't supporting it right now, but I think that's going to change over the next year or so. I know, for example, with the OASIS data technical subcommittee, they're looking at, how to bring that into the data world and possibly, for other formats as well. Tip number 3, okay? It's not all about Google. So when you think about it, for a lot of companies, right, what you see, the public content that Google handles is the minority of the content. There is so much more content that is gated within the company. So while voice search is always SIRI and Google, there is more, okay? So you need to be prepared to also surface these things if they're inside your company. So for example, if I have a customer, in a gated environment that asks, how do I switch Ubuntu log to debug to a device? Okay, you want your smart portal or you want your, web search to do natural language processing to basically break that down into the intent, which is a how-to. What does the user want to do? Switch log to debug. Which operating system? Ubuntu. And then possibly if the user is logged in, you also know that they're an administrator, and you also know which product they have from you. And then once you do that, you can use a platform like ZoomIn, which basically provides you with a semantic API, which you can basically pipe in semantic queries, have that platform go over your structured, tagged content, and get you back the best answer that's going to be read out for the customer. So just to summarize, because we're almost out of time, voice search is exploding. You've seen it. Everybody knows that. It started with marketing and e-commerce. It's coming to our industry right now, right? Second best is just not going to do it. As we said, it's, if you're not the first in Google, the device is not going to read you out. That means you got to optimize your content. But the good news is there's plenty you can do even today, and if you do it right, you can completely redefine the way your customers consume your content, and go ahead and do voice searches. Any questions? Either here or in the virtual track, which I don't know where do I see them, but yeah. Yeah.
So when it comes to voice search and you're providing technical documentation, it makes sense to optimize your content because if they're looking for how to do something, you can quickly provide them with an answer on how to do it with your technical content. What about when it comes to the e-commerce side? Like if you're trying to provide thought leadership and your answers are going to be either more complicated, or if you provide an answer, you still want them to come to your website because you want them to take another action so you can engage with them further. It feels like if that's your objective with voice search, it's going to be harder to do that because if they get their preliminary answer, they're not going to have a reason to go further to your website and continue the engagement.
I can say the following. Most e-commerce websites I've seen, what they do is they basically create new content for FAQ, which then basically invites you to do further drilling. So they analyze the 20, 30, 40 things people care about, and then once they do that, they basically either add, in their content, some kind of a link that calls on the user to actually press and be redirected to the site. But otherwise, I think what they understand is that it's better to be able to say a few sentences to the user and maybe not have him redirected to your site than not having him at all. So I think that's the compromise you got to do at the age where there is no second best, there is just one. Hope that answers.
Okay, any questions from the virtual audience? No? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.